As pilot, you all recognize what we've just seen, a bad landing. What happened? Climb into the pilot's seat and fly along with us as we examine good and bad landings. A good approach consists of being established in the approach slot with airspeed and sink rate stabilized. The approach slot is established by using the 1,000-foot runway markings as a visual aiming point and controlling airspeed and sink rate within normal limits. The primary reference is visual, with only momentary cross-checks of the instruments to confirm sink rate and airspeed. We have often heard that good landings are made out of good approaches. Let's change this maxim and say that bad landings can be made out of any approach if you ignore the last 50 feet. To make a good landing, the pilot must be aware of the factors affecting his flight path as he transitions from the approach to touchdown. These factors are focal point changeover, thrust management, touchdown technique. If the approach slot has been properly maintained down to the 50-foot point, you have been protected against undershoot and overshoot and will be positioned to land near the aiming point. It is not mandatory to land on the aiming point. It has served its purpose in guiding the aircraft to the runway threshold. Attempting to force the aircraft to touch down exactly on a predetermined point often leads to a hard or nose wheel first landing. About 50 feet above the runway, the pilot changes his focal point from the 1,000-foot target toward midfield to judge his rate of closure with the runway. The height at which the pilot's focal point changes over will vary slightly with the individual and the terrain in the approach path. The pilot's visual sensitivity to his rate of closure with the runway tells him when to change over from approach to landing. He must judge when, how much, and how fast to change the attitude by visual reference. The pilot experiences a sensation from his visual assessment of the aircraft's closure with the runway. The medical profession refers to this as motion parallax. He reacts to this sensation by manipulation of the control wheel. It is his desire to meet the runway at a rate that experience tells him is acceptable. His method of adjusting this rate is through the feel of the control wheel in his hands. With training and experience, the pilot will sense if he is approaching the runway at too fast a rate and respond with a hand-measured back pressure on the control wheel to reduce his rate of closure. The new rate of closure is now assessed, and if it is satisfactory, the hand will hold this pressure and slightly increase it as the airspeed bleeds. The pilot must accept minor variations in the touchdown point and concentrate on flying the aircraft to a smooth landing. The attitude change required for landing is very small. He must fly the main gear onto the ground by feel. Somewhere after the changeover from approach to touchdown, throttles will be closed. This will vary depending on aircraft type. Know the deceleration characteristics of your aircraft. On the DC-9, the drag increment is shallow and thrust may be reduced near the changeover point. On aircraft such as the 727 and late model 707s with full span leading edge devices, the drag increment is steep. Thrust reduction may coincide with main gear contact. Extend the spoilers immediately after main gear touchdown. This places about 70% of the weight on the main gear. It is common to our 3 and 4 engine equipment that as spoilers are activated, the nose will have a tendency to pitch up. This pitch up must be controlled with elevator. From this point, the nose gear must be flown smoothly onto the runway. Continue flying the aircraft until slowed to taxi speed. A condition that may affect your landing is floating. Floating can result from excessive speed or as a result of tailwind shear. What do you do when it happens to you? To smoothly counteract excessive floating, gently relax a portion of the back pressure being held and re-establish an acceptable sink rate by sensing your rate of closure with the runway through visual cues. The amount and rate of back pressure release and thrust reduction is dictated by the deceleration characteristics of your aircraft. A smooth recovery from floating will result in landing farther down the runway than planned, runway length permitting. Accept the longer touchdown and continue to fly the aircraft until slowed to taxi speed. A major problem encountered on landing is the bounce. Two primary causes of bounces are excessive sink rate and delayed flare. In either case, the recovery technique is the same. Hold or re-establish a normal landing attitude. Add thrust as necessary to control airspeed. A shallow skip will not normally require an addition of thrust. Fly the aircraft smoothly back onto the runway. Caution: when recovering from a bounce, don't push the column forward abruptly. If you overcorrect by lowering the nose abruptly, the nose wheel may hit first and fail. Don't allow the pitch attitude to increase above normal. This increases the height of the bounce and could cause the ventral fin or tail to strike the runway. If the bounce is high and excessive runway will be used during the recovery, execute a missed approach. Don't retract the gear until a positive rate of climb is established during the missed approach. Be alert for yaw due to asymmetric engine spin-up when advancing the throttles to the takeoff position. Right or wrong, a pilot is usually judged by his landings. The passenger may blame a rough flight on the weather, but he holds you responsible for a hard landing. Maintain a high degree of proficiency in your landings by evaluating yourself against this formula. Establish the approach slot. Stabilize airspeed and sink rate. Nearing the threshold, move your focal point down the runway. Control rate of closure by visual reference and feel. Reduce thrust according to the deceleration characteristics of your aircraft. Continue to fly the aircraft through the landing until slowed to taxi speed. Look easy? It is, if you'll watch the last 50 feet.